Don't!" His voice cracked raw with a pain she hadn't expected. The quiet farmer who'd offered her shelter now looked at her with wounded eyes. "Don't be like them." Eleanor Vance froze, the cool dismissal dying on her lips. Who were they? What unspoken betrayal did she suddenly represent? "Don't let this," Jacob Cole pleaded, his gaze pinning her in place amidst the rustic quiet of the barn, the fury of the blizzard outside momentarily forgotten. Just be another storm you forget the moment the sun comes out. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed a raw, wounded sound, tearing across the empty canvas of the snow-choked country road. White sheets billowed and danced in the headlights, phantoms in the blizzard's rage. Inside the luxury sedan, Eleanor Vance gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white control. It was the currency of her world, the foundation upon which her empire was built, and now it was slipping through her fingers like smoke. The car, usually a whisper-quiet beast of German engineering, groaned in protest as its tires lost purchase on the ice. A sickening skid, a desperate sputter from the engine, and then silence. The dashboard lights flickered once-twice, then died, plunging the interior into an unnerving darkness broken only by the swirling chaos outside. "No, oh no, not now." Eleanor muttered the words, tight with frustration. She tapped the gleaming touchscreen, unresponsive. Her phone, a sleek lifeline to her meticulously ordered world, displayed the one word she dreaded most. No signal. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked beneath her usual composure. Outside, the storm intensified, a furious white wall erasing the world. She took a breath, the kind she took before walking into a hostile boardroom, and pushed open the heavy car door. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, its icy teeth biting through her expensive cashmere coat. She stepped out. Her designer boots, meant for navigating polished city pavements, sank instantly, chillingly, into the deep snow stranded. Lost, her GPS, usually unerring, had rerouted her down this forgotten artery of the countryside, on her way to a high-profile fundraising summit hours outside the city. Now that world felt 1,000,000 miles away. Freezing air seared her lungs. Shivering began deep and uncontrollable. Then through the blinding white, a pinprick of light, faint distant across a seemingly endless field. A house, a barn. It didn't matter. It was hope, a singular, fragile point of light in the overwhelming dark. She stumbled forward, pushing against the wind, snow lashing her face, clinging to her eyelashes, soaking through the layers meant more for style than survival. Each step was an effort, a testament to the willpower that had carved her path to the top. By the time she reached the dim outline of a farmhouse porch, her hands were numb, her lips stiff, her elegant coat heavy with melting snow. She pounded on the weathered wooden door, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the wind. Hope felt thin, stretched, taut, like a wire about to snap. "Please, someone, anyone." The door creaked open, revealing not warmth but shadow. A tall figure filled the frame, broad-shouldered, silhouetted against a dim interior light. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a man, lean and weathered, clad in a simple flannel shirt and worn jeans. His face was stark, carved by wind and work, his jawline sharp, his blue eyes cautious, assessing. He didn't smile. He simply watched her, a stranger materializing from the storm. "I'm sorry," Eleanor stammered, her teeth chattering violently, betraying the control she fought to maintain. "My car. It broke down, back on the road. I'm lost." She hugged herself tighter, the shivering intensifying. "These boots." She added a faint, desperate attempt at normalcy, maybe even humor escaping her lips. "They're definitely not designed for off-roading in a blizzard." The man's expression didn't change, though perhaps a flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes before vanishing. He remained silent, studying her, his gaze missing nothing. The expensive coat, the shivering, the desperation barely masked by practiced poise. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the wind's relentless assault. "Please," she whispered, the facade finally cracking, raw fear chilling her more than the cold. "I need somewhere warm. Just for a while. I think I'll freeze out here." Another long pause. He looked past her out into the swirling white, then back at her face, his gaze lingering for a beat. Finally, slowly, he opened the door wider. "Get in." The two words were rough, reluctant, perhaps, but they were an anchor. Eleanor practically fell inside, collapsing onto a worn entryway rug, her body instantly profoundly grateful for the sudden cessation of wind and the simple, enveloping warmth. The farmhouse was. Basic wooden floors, aged but clean, a stone fireplace dominating one wall, though currently dark, a worn leather armchair, a sturdy wooden table. It smelled of pine wood smoke, and something else, something earthy and old, like settled dust and quiet solitude. It was a world away from her sleek, minimalist penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Coat the man said. Not a question. She hesitated. Vulnerability was a weakness she rarely afforded. But the damp chill clinging to her was unbearable. She slipped off the heavy soaked cashmere, revealing a silk blouse, now plastered unflatteringly to her skin. He didn't react, just disappeared for a moment, and returned with a thick, folded wool blanket, its texture rough against her fingers. He gestured towards the armchair near the cold hearth. "Sit." She sank into the chair, pulling the blanket tightly around her shoulders, a shield against more than just the cold. Her eyes met his as he stood watching her. His arms crossed his expression, still guarded, unreadable. Who was this man? This silent, solitary figure in the middle of nowhere. "I'm Eleanor." She managed her voice, steadier now, in the warmth, though still trembling slightly. "Eleanor Vance." He gave a curt nod. "Jacob Cole." "Thank you, Jacob," she said, sincerity clear in her tone. "Truly, I didn't know where else." Her voice trailed off. He continued to study her, his blue eyes sharp. "Don't get many visitors," he stated flatly. "Especially not your kind. Especially not in a storm like this." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Her kind, wealthy, out of place. An intrusion into his quiet, isolated world. The silence descended again, heavy and awkward, broken only by the faint crackle of the settling house and the distant fury of the wind. Two worlds thrown together by a blizzard's whim, orbiting each other with cautious curiosity and unspoken questions, trapped in the quiet heart of the storm. Something had begun, though neither could yet guess its shape or consequence. Sunlight pale and thin after the storm's fury filtered through the high, dusty window of the barn loft Jacob used as his main living space. The main farmhouse he'd explained curtly last night, over a shared silence, had roofing issues. Winter's casualty. The barn, however, was surprisingly warm, insulated, smelling strongly of hay, old leather, and the lingering smoke from a small wood-burning stove in the corner, for Eleanor Vance, waking up on a mattress laid on the floor, cocooned in Jacob's rough blankets, and wearing a flannel shirt large enough to be a dress, it felt like waking up on another planet. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting the unfamiliarity. The silence wasn't the muffled distant hum of the city she knew, but a deeper quiet, punctuated by the occasional stamp or snort of horses in the stalls below. The creak of old wood settling no espresso machine, no immediate access to global markets via her phone, still stubbornly displaying no signal. It was profoundly unsettling. Down below she heard movement. Jacob was already up tending to the animals. She could hear his low, quiet voice, a murmur entirely different from the clipped tones he used with her. Drawn by the smell of wood smoke and something akin to coffee, she climbed down the sturdy wooden ladder, feeling clumsy and conspicuous in the borrowed clothes. Jacob glanced up as she reached the bottom, his expression unreadable. He was stirring something in a pot on the stove. Without a word, he ladled a dark, steaming liquid into a thick pottery mug and handed it to her. It wasn't the delicate porcelain she was used to, but the mug was warm, solid in her hands. "Thank you," she said, taking a cautious sip. It was strong, slightly bitter, chicory coffee. Not her usual, but undeniably warming. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the stove and the soft sounds of the horses. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar urge to fill it. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked, gesturing vaguely. "To help, I feel rather useless, just sitting here." Jacob looked her up and down slowly, taking in the oversized flannel and the faint look of bewildered determination on her face. A corner of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. "Think you can manage feeding the chickens without causing an international incident?" Eleanor straightened slightly, a flicker of her usual confidence returning. "I manage a multi-billion-dollar corporation." "Jacob, I think I can handle poultry." 10 minutes later. She wasn't so sure. The chickens seemed to possess a chaotic energy she couldn't predict. One particularly bold hen had snatched a piece of feed right from her hand, startling her into dropping the entire scoop. Feathers flew, squawks ensued. Jacob leaned against the barn door frame, arms crossed, watching the spectacle with an expression that hovered somewhere between amusement and profound resignation. "Right," he said, his voice dry as dust, when she finally retreated, slightly ruffled and decidedly less confident. "Maybe stick to boardrooms." Eleanor felt a flush creep up her neck, a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. She wasn't used to feeling incompetent. They ate a simple breakfast later, thick oatmeal with a dollop of honey, the chicory coffee. Eleanor, trying again for connection, remarked, "It's very substantial, not like those tiny portions you get for a fortune at city brunch spots." Jacob looked up from his bowl, his blue eyes direct. Food's meant to fuel work out here. Eleanor, real work, not just fuel meetings. The subtle emphasis wasn't lost on her. He saw her world as frivolous, unproductive. Later, while Jacob was outside, checking fences damaged by the storm's weight, Eleanor wandered the barn. She ran a hand along a sturdy wooden beam, breathed in the scent of hay and horse. She stopped by the stall of a calm-eyed brown mare, stroking its soft nose. She saw Jacob through the open barn door, moving with an easy, practiced rhythm, his connection to the land, to the physical world, undeniable. He was competent here, grounded, in a way that felt both alien and strangely compelling. The conversation resumed stilted later that afternoon, as they both sought the warmth of the stove. "The roads might be clearer tomorrow," Eleanor stated, trying to sound casual. "I should be able to leave then." Jacob didn't look at her immediately, focusing on adjusting a log in the stove. "If you want to," he finally replied, his tone flat. "Of course I want to," she said, a touch too quickly. "I have responsibilities, a company to run." He finally turned, leaning back against a support beam. "Right. People like you always have somewhere else to be. Somewhere more important." There was a hard edge to his voice, now a cynicism that went beyond their different lifestyles. "This," he gestured around the barn, "is just a temporary inconvenience. You'll leave when the sun comes out." He paused, his gaze distant for a second, learned that lesson the hard way once. The last sentence was quiet, almost a throwaway line, but it snagged Eleanor's attention. Before she could ask, he turned away, busying himself with checking the horses' water troughs. Had he been talking to her, or just thinking aloud? The implication stung. He saw her as transient, shallow, just like whoever they were from his past. Part of her wanted to argue, to defend herself, to list her accomplishments as proof of her substance. But another part, a quieter, more honest part, felt a flicker of unease. Was he wrong? Her entire life was built on moving forward, on achieving the next goal, on leaving behind anything that didn't serve her ambition. She watched his broad back, the set of his shoulders suggesting a solitude that might not be entirely by choice. The barn felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker with unspoken words, unspoken histories. She wanted to leave, to get back to her world, her control. And yet, a sliver of curiosity, sharp and unexpected, had taken root. Who was Jacob Cole, really? And why did his quiet dismissal bother her so much? The warmth of the stove did little to chase away the sudden chill of uncertainty that settled deep within her. Night pressed against the barn again, heavy and close. The brief respite of the pale morning sun had vanished, replaced by a returning wind that moaned around the eaves and rattled the loft window like an angry ghost. Inside the small stove radiated heat, but a different kind of chill had settled over Eleanor Vance. It started subtly, an ache behind the eyes, a weariness that seeped deeper than mere fatigue. She'd tried to ignore it, attributing it to the stress, the unfamiliar surroundings. The poor sleep control, after all, extended to one's own body, didn't it? But the shivering that started later that evening wasn't entirely from the drafty corners of the barn. It came from within, deep and racking. By the time Jacob climbed the ladder with a simple supper of soup and bread, she was curled tightly under the blankets. Her skin flushed, her breathing shallow and fast. He stopped dead on the top rung, taking in the sight. Concern, sharp and immediate, replaced the usual guardedness in his eyes. "Hey," he said, his voice low, losing its earlier edge. "You're not looking so good." "I'm fine," Eleanor rasped, but a harsh cough betrayed her words, shaking her small frame. "Just tired." Jacob didn't argue. He set the tray down on a nearby crate and knelt beside her makeshift bed. He gently placed the back of his rough, calloused hand against her forehead. His touch was surprisingly cool, steady. "You're burning up," he stated simply. The clinical assessment contrasted with the undeniable worry shadowing his features. For the next few hours, the dynamic between them shifted entirely. The cautious distance, the subtle power plays of their different worlds. They dissolved in the face of Eleanor's raw vulnerability. Jacob moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of familiarity, with tending to needs, if not necessarily human ones. He brought cool water and cloths for her forehead. He brewed a pungent herbal tea. Pine needle, he called it, with a bit of mint, coaxing her to drink the hot forest-tasting liquid that surprisingly soothed her raw throat. His movements were careful, almost hesitant at times, as if unsure how to handle something so fragile. He wasn't rough, but he wasn't polished either. There was a fundamental competence in his care, born of self-reliance. He adjusted her blankets, added wood to the stove, sat quietly nearby, simply being present. The fever loosened Eleanor's tightly held control, blurring the edges of the present. Fragments of the past surfaced, unwelcome ghosts in the flickering lamplight. Names and faces from countless foster homes swam in her vision. The cold institutional smell of a group shelter, the gnawing ache of feeling utterly terrifyingly alone. They never believed me. She murmured, her voice thin, distant, caught somewhere between the barn loft and a dimly remembered past. Jacob leaned closer, straining to hear. When I was sick, foster parents thought I was faking to skip school. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped her lips, as if school wasn't the only place that felt halfway normal. She shifted restlessly, her eyes glassy. There was this one winter, strep throat, I think. Felt like swallowing glass. They locked me in a closet, said I was being dramatic. Her breath hitched. Lay there felt like forever, until a teacher, Miss Helen, found me. She worked at the library after school. Eleanor's voice softened slightly at the memory. She never asked questions. Just, let me sit there. Read quietly. She probably saved me in small ways. Jacob remained silent, but his stillness was heavy-charged. He watched her face, his jaw tight, a muscle working almost imperceptibly. He'd seen hardship, lived a life, stripped bare of luxuries. But the casual cruelty of her childhood story struck a chord deep within him, resonating with his own ingrained solitude. When her breathing evened slightly, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment, he spoke, his voice rougher than usual, quieter. Know what it's like, he said, startling her. She blinked, focusing on his face in the dim light. Being sick and alone. He looked down at his hands, avoiding her gaze. Lost my folks young. Aunt raised me for a bit then. Mostly just me and the farm since I was 16. Winter flu hits different when there's no one to bring you soup, or even notice if you don't get up. It wasn't a plea for sympathy, just a stark statement of fact, a shared piece of brokenness offered quietly in the dim light. Eleanor stared at him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. Not just the gruff farmer, but a man forged in solitude, marked by his own unseen losses. The knowledge settled between them, a fragile bridge built across the chasm of their different lives. He understood a part of her that no one in her glittering city world could possibly comprehend. He reached out his fingers, brushing briefly against her arm, as he adjusted the blanket again. The touch lingered a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A current quiet but undeniable passed between them. Empathy, recognition, the shared language of survival. Rest now, Eleanor. He murmured, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She nodded weakly, the fight draining out of her, as she drifted into an uneasy, feverish sleep. The last thing she was aware of was Jacob's steady presence, nearby, a silent guardian in the storm-tossed night. And for the first time since she'd stumbled onto his porch, a tiny, unexpected seedling of trust began to take root in the barren landscape of her heart. He wasn't just shelter from the storm outside. Somehow he felt like shelter from the one raging within her, too. The fever broke sometime before dawn, leaving Eleanor feeling weak, washed out, but blessedly clear-headed. The fragile intimacy, woven in the fevered darkness of the night before, lingered in the quiet air of the barn loft. When Jacob brought her a simple breakfast, his movements were still careful, his gaze softer than it had been just days ago. A tentative truce seemed to hold, fragile as ice, on a thawing pond. She was sipping the last of the chicory coffee when it happened. A faint, tinny chime, a sound so incongruous in the rustic quiet that it took her a moment to place it. Her phone, propped against the window frame in a desperate search for connection, it had finally caught a fleeting, intermittent signal. Before she could even fully register the implications, it rang shrill and demanding. Instinct took over. Years of conditioning. She snatched it up, Vance. The voice on the other end was tight with panic, Richard, her second-in-command. Eleanor. Thank God. Where have you been? It's chaos here. The Sterling merger. It's falling apart. Harrison's making a move, spreading rumors. The board is demanding an emergency meeting. They need you back now, Eleanor. Yesterday, the words hit her like a physical shock. Sterling merger, Harrison, board meeting, the vocabulary of her real life, the high-stakes battlefield she commanded, rushed back in, drowning out the quiet intimacy of the barn, the tentative connection with the man standing just feet away. Panic, cold and familiar, seized her. This was what happened when she lost control, when she allowed herself to be sidetracked. Disaster. I understand, Richard, she said, her voice instantly sharpening, becoming the cool, decisive instrument her colleagues knew. Arrange the jet wheels up as soon as possible. I'm on my way. Handle Harrison stall. The board. She disconnected her mind. Already racing, formulating strategies, assessing damage. She turned, barely registering, Jacob standing there watching her, his earlier softness replaced by a returning guardedness. The shift in her demeanor was stark, instantaneous. The vulnerable woman from the night before had vanished, replaced by the formidable CEO. I have to go, she said, the words, clipped, efficient. There's a situation back in the city. My company needs me. She started gathering the few belongings she had, folding the flannel shirt Jacob had lent her, with brisk, impersonal movements. Thank you, Jacob, for everything, the shelter, the care. I'll arrange for someone to compensate you for your trouble. Of course, compensate him, as if his kindness, his quiet presence, the shared vulnerability could be settled with a wire transfer. Jacob didn't move. He just watched her. His blue eyes narrowed slightly, tracking her efficient, dismissive actions. The air in the barn grew thick, heavy with unspoken things. He saw the walls slamming back into place, higher and colder than ever. He saw the fear beneath the efficiency. Just like that, he finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Eleanor paused, her hand hovering over her damp cashmere coat. It's not just like that. Jacob, it's my life. My responsibility. Billions of dollars, thousands of jobs are at stake. She tried to make him understand the scale, the weight of her world. Is that what this was? He pressed, taking a step closer, violating the safe distance she was trying to re-establish. Just shelter. A place to wait out the storm. He gestured vaguely between them. Was any of last night real? Or was that just the fever talking? Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, turning away, unable to meet his direct gaze. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This isn't my life. You know that I belong back there. She waved a hand, vaguely, encompassing the world beyond the barn walls. This was just an interruption. An interruption, he repeated the words, flat, devoid of emotion, which somehow made them cut deeper. He took another step. Or maybe his voice dropped lower, laced with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Maybe this is the first real thing you've felt in years, and it scares the hell out of you. You know nothing about me, she retorted, her voice brittle. I know, he said, his gaze unwavering, that you build walls so high you can't even see over them anymore. I know you run. Is this about the company, Eleanor? The billions? The jobs? Or are you just running again? Running from anything that feels too real, too complicated? How dare you? She whispered, stung. You live out here, alone, away from everything. What do you know about pressure, about responsibility? A shadow crossed Jacob's face, a flicker of deep old pain. I know about things mattering, he said, his voice tight. And I know about leaving, He paused, swallowing hard, the next words seeming to tear their way out of him. I understand having to walk away. But how you walk away, that matters. He looked directly at her. Now his eyes filled with a raw hurt that mirrored the vulnerability she'd shown him just hours before. I had someone, he began, his voice rough, unsteady. Someone important. She promised things, made me believe maybe solitude wasn't the only way. His gaze didn't falter. Then things got difficult. Staying meant choosing something messy, something real over the easier path out. She chose easy. Eleanor. She left. He held her gaze, the accusation unspoken but devastatingly clear. Don't, he pleaded, the single word, raw, almost breaking. Don't be like them. Don't let this. He gestured again, encompassing the shared moments, the illness, the tentative connection. Don't let this just be another storm. You forget the moment the sun comes out. His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. His pain, his fear of abandonment. It wasn't just his story. It was the echo of her own deepest terror, the one she'd spent her life outrunning. He wasn't just accusing her of leaving. He was accusing her of inflicting the very wound she feared most. She saw herself through his eyes. Not powerful, not controlled, but fearful and fleeting. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The barn, the smell of hay, the lowing of the horses, it all faded. There was only the suffocating weight of his words, the raw vulnerability in his eyes, the devastating reflection of her own guarded heart. The air crackled thick with hurt fear, and the ruins of a connection that had felt so real just moments before. He had shown her his deepest scar, and in doing so had exposed her own. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the relentless moan of the wind outside, mocking the wreckage within. The silence after Jacob's raw plea was a chasm deep and echoing. Eleanor stood frozen, his words. Don't be like them. Don't let this just be another storm you forget, reverberating in the suddenly too quiet barn. The high-powered CEO, the woman who could command boardrooms and navigate complex international deals, had no strategy for this, no defense against the raw human truth reflected in his wounded eyes. Her phone chirped again, a notification confirming the arrival time of the helicopter. Richard had scrambled. Rescue escape. The mechanism of her old life clicked back into gear, a shield against the overwhelming flood of emotion. She took a shaky breath, pulling the remnants of her composure around her, like the now dry but still inadequate cashmere coat. They're coming, she said, her voice carefully, neutral, avoiding his gaze. I should wait outside. She turned to leave, expecting silence, perhaps the cold indifference he'd shown initially. Instead, Jacob spoke, his voice low and steady, devoid of anger, but heavy with a weariness that went bone deep. Running won't fix what's broken inside, Eleanor, he said quietly to her, retreating back. Not the parts you broke long before you ever met me. He paused, letting the words sink in. I hope you find whatever it is you think you're looking for back there. She flinched but didn't turn around. She couldn't. Each step towards the barn door felt like wading through thick mud. She pushed it open, the rush of cold, clean air, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension within. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew louder, a mechanical heartbeat, summoning her back to a world she suddenly wasn't sure she recognized. The journey back was a blur of efficient luxury. The sterile interior of the helicopter, the seamless transfer to her private car, waiting at a regional airfield, the smooth glide through traffic towards the city's gleaming heart. Eleanor tried to focus, reviewing reports on her tablet, dictating instructions into her phone, but the image of Jacob's face, etched with pain, and that devastating plea kept intruding. His quiet words echoed louder than the engine's roar. Running won't fix what's broken. The city welcomed her back with its familiar symphony of noise and light, but it felt different now, hollow. The towering skyscraper housing her office seemed less like a symbol of power and more like an elaborate cage. Assistants swarmed her the moment she stepped into the lobby, a flurry of updates, urgent memos, hushed whispers about the situation. She walked into the emergency board meeting flawlessly dressed, outwardly calm, radiating the authority they expected. She navigated the treacherous currents of corporate politics. Parried Harrison's attacks, presented a revised strategy for the Sterling merger, with cold, calculated brilliance. She performed, she won. But as she sat there, surrounded by the titans of industry, the polished wood table reflecting their expensive watches and calculated smiles, she felt utterly terrifyingly empty. The victory tasted like ash, later alone in her penthouse apartment, a vast expanse of glass, steel, and minimalist art high above the glittering city. The silence was more profound than the quiet of Jacob's barn. It was the silence of isolation. She poured herself a glass of expensive scotch, the amber liquid doing nothing to warm the chill inside her. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the endless sprawl of lights. Her kingdom, built with grit, determination, and walls thick enough to keep everyone out, including, she now realized, herself. She sank onto a low designer sofa, the leather cool beneath her touch, rummaging in her coat pocket for her keys. Her fingers brushed against something soft, unfamiliar. She pulled it out. A square of faded blue flannel, Jacob's handkerchief. The one he must have tucked into her pocket sometime during the feverish night when she'd been too delirious to notice. Not the one he'd used on her forehead, but another clean one. A simple, practical piece of cloth, worth nothing, worth everything. She clutched it tightly, bringing it to her face, inhaling the faint scent of wood smoke, hay, and something uniquely Jacob. And then the control she had maintained, so fiercely, finally shattered. Tears, hot and silent, spilled down her cheeks, soaking the front of her silk blouse. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of profound loss, of recognizing the stark emptiness of the life she had so meticulously built. "What have I done?" she whispered into the uncaring silence of the room, hugging the simple handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. She finally acknowledged the truth Jacob had thrown at her. She had been running from her past, running from connection, running from the terrifying possibility of needing someone. The first step, she thought dimly through her tears, was admitting it. Perhaps it wasn't too late to forgive herself for building those walls. The next morning, she sat numbly in her office, staring blankly at the skyline. Richard entered cautiously. He hesitated, holding out a folded newspaper. Page 3. "Thought you might want to see this." Her eyes focused on the grainy photograph. A familiar figure in a flannel shirt, standing beside a county sheriff, accepting a small plaque, Jacob Cole. The headline read, "Local Farmer, Honored for Bravery in Blizzard Rescue Efforts." The article detailed how he had provided shelter to stranded motorists, plural, during the storm, using his resources and knowledge of the back roads to help coordinate rescue efforts, all while asking for nothing in return. It painted a picture of quiet strength, resourcefulness, and unassuming integrity. He hadn't just saved her. He had saved others. While she had been wrapped in his blankets, lost in her fever, he had been this solid, dependable good. She traced the outline of his face in the photograph with a trembling finger. The man she had fled from, the man who had seen through her defenses, the man who had asked her not to be like the ones who left. The last vestiges of her indecision crumbled. The empire she commanded, the wealth, the status. It all seemed like fool's gold compared to the simple, profound authenticity of the man in the picture, of the life he represented, of the connection she had carelessly, fearfully thrown away. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city that had defined her for so long. It no longer looked like power. It looked like a beautifully decorated prison. She picked up her phone, her hand steady now. "Richard," she said, her voice clear, calm, and utterly resolved. "Cancel my afternoon, all of it, and get me a rental car. Something sturdy, 4-wheel drive." She took a deep breath. I have somewhere I need to be, somewhere she should never have left. The sturdy rental car, coated in road dust, crunched softly on the gravel path leading up to Jacob Cole's farm. Eleanor turned off the engine, her hands trembling slightly on the wheel. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, painting the familiar barn and the now repaired farmhouse roof in hues of soft gold and lavender. It looked peaceful, whole could she be. He was near the fence line, mending something hammer in hand, his movements steady, familiar. He looked up as the car door opened, his body going still. The hammer froze mid-swing. Across the field their eyes met, and the world seemed to hold its breath. No anger lingered in his gaze, just a profound stillness. A deep, questioning quiet. She walked towards him slowly, the expensive city boots replaced by practical, sturdy ones. The silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of evening birds and the frantic pounding of her own heart. She stopped a few feet away. "Jacob." She began, her voice barely a whisper. "I came back." He didn't speak, immediately just searched her face, looking for something. Honesty, remorse. "Your words," she continued, finding strength in the truth back in the barn. "Before I left. They were hard to hear, because they were true. I was running. I've spent my whole life running from things that felt too real." She took a shaky breath. "But I don't want to run anymore. That life back there." She gestured vaguely towards the direction of the city. "It's not empty because it lacks things. Jacob, it's empty because it lacks, meaning it lacks you." He finally lowered the hammer, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "It wasn't easy," he said, quietly, acknowledging the pain of their last encounter. "Watching you leave, I know," she whispered, tears welling. "And I'm so sorry for the hurt I caused, for not seeing, for not understanding sooner." He stepped closer, closing the small distance between them. He didn't embrace her. Not yet. Instead, he simply reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. So he asked, his voice low, hopeful, "What happens now?" "Now," Eleanor said, meeting his gaze directly, letting him see the resolve, the fear, and the hope warring within her. "Now I learn how to stay." 1 year later, the farm breathed with a different kind of life. The repaired roof gleamed faintly. Wildflowers spilled from newly planted garden beds alongside rows of practical vegetables. Laughter light and genuine was heard more often than the solitary sounds of wind and work. On the edge of Jacob's land, where neglected pasture once stood, was the Willow Path Center. It wasn't grand, just a series of workshops housed in sturdy, repurposed outbuildings, but it radiated purpose. Inside, Eleanor dressed not in power suits, but in practical jeans and a simple blouse, worked alongside formerly homeless individuals, guiding them through vocational training programs, carpentry, sustainable farming techniques, basic bookkeeping. Today she beamed as Maria, a quiet woman who hadn't made eye contact for weeks when she first arrived, confidently showed off the birdhouse she'd just finished sanding. It wasn't closing a multi-million-dollar deal, but the quiet pride in Maria's eyes felt like a far greater victory. This was the legacy Eleanor was building now, one of quiet dignity, second chances, and tangible hope. Integrating hadn't been seamless. There had been curious glances from some neighbors, quiet struggles as Eleanor navigated a world without her usual resources, but Jacob's steady presence and her own quiet determination had earned her a place. Humor spot 1, optional line. She still occasionally mixed up the feed buckets, much to Jacob's dry amusement. Still think chickens are easier than shareholders. Eleanor. But now they could laugh about it together. The wedding took place not in a grand hall, but in the middle of the wildflower field, behind the barn, bathed in the golden light of a late summer afternoon. Wooden benches held a small gathering. Close neighbors, trainees from the center. Richard, surprisingly supportive after the initial shock, and a handful of true friends from Eleanor's old life. Jacob stood tall in a simple linen shirt, his eyes fixed on Eleanor as she walked towards him, her light silk dress whispering in the breeze. Tiny daisies woven into her braid. Beside Jacob stood Lily, the bright-eyed 7-year-old girl they were now fostering her own past. Holding echoes of Eleanor's, Lily clutched a slightly lopsided bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself. As Eleanor reached Jacob, Lily stepped forward, her small voice clear and carrying in the gentle breeze. Humor spot 2. Mama, she began seriously, looking up at Eleanor, then glancing at Jacob. You used to live in a glass house, and Papa Jacob lives with horses. It's funny, a soft chuckle rippled through the guests. Lily beamed, then her expression turned earnest. But you make me feel safe. You make me feel loved. Thank you for choosing me. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she knelt to hug the little girl fiercely. Jacob's hand found hers, grounding her. Their vows were simple, heartfelt promises spoken beneath the vast, open sky. Later, as twilight painted the fields in soft purples and the first stars emerged, Eleanor leaned against Jacob near the edge of the field, watching Lily chase fireflies under strings of fairy lights. Humor spot 3. Admit it, Jacob murmured, his arm around her waist. You still miss room service sometimes. Eleanor laughed softly, resting her head on his chest. Maybe just a little, she conceded. But I wouldn't trade this. She looked around, at the glowing barn, the quiet fields, the man beside her. We found our way, didn't we? We did, Jacob agreed, his voice filled with quiet contentment. Took a wrong turn in a blizzard to get here. But we made it. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of hay and earth, and hope. The empire was gone, the glittering cage left behind. Here, under the quiet stars, surrounded by love and purpose, she was finally unequivocally home, not because she had conquered a world, but because she had finally built a life. Sometimes the path home isn't a straight line, is it? Like Eleanor and Jacob, maybe we build walls around ourselves, thinking we know exactly where we belong, until a storm, literal or figurative, forces us onto an unknown road, leading us to confront the very things we've tried to protect ourselves from. How often do we miss seeing the quiet strength or hidden warmth in places or people simply because they look different from what we expected? Their journey from lonely city peaks and quiet guarded fields to finally building a shared hearth filled with purpose and love truly resonated with us. If their story of second chances, finding courage in vulnerability, and choosing a life rooted in something real touched your heart too. We'd love to connect further. What part of Eleanor and Jacob's journey back to each other moved you the most? Was it the quiet care during the storm, the difficult confrontation that laid bare their fears, or the quiet courage shown in rebuilding their lives together? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your perspectives, and we genuinely want to grow and tell better stories for you. If you have any thoughts on how we could improve, perhaps a plot point you wished unfolded differently, something about the characters you wanted to explore more, or even feedback on the narration style, please do let us know in the comments. Your constructive feedback is incredibly valuable and helps us create more meaningful experiences. If this story warmed you or made you think, please give it a like. And if you feel it might resonate with someone else who believes in the beauty of second chances, feel free to share it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into stories that stir the soul. Let's continue exploring tales of love healing and what truly matters together. Thank you for sharing this time and this story with us. Until next time, may you find warmth in unexpected places and the courage to follow your own path home